Oh gosh, I see this so much on this channel, on YouTube generally, social media. It's such a problem. So my advice is, this is a bit of an unstructured, unfiltered video where I'm going to be answering questions from my newsletter on nutrition. If you've got any questions that you want answered, then just pop them into the comment section and I'll get back to you. And if you want to be part of my newsletter, then you can just head to nutritiontriathlon.com and sign up. It's free. I send actionable advice to triathletes on nutrition so that you can make your training and racing as good as possible. How critical is the 30-minute post-workout nutrition window? Sometimes I can't eat right away after training. This is a great question, and the answer is both really important and not important. So the two main things after a workout are carbs and protein. From a protein point of view, the answer is it's possibly not that important, and that's because of something called muscle protein synthesis, which is the process where new muscle tissue or parts of muscle tissue are created. It used to be thought that there was a really short window for this, but we now know that the time frame is more like 24 to 48 hours. So when you bear that in mind, it's actually your total daily protein intake which is more important. Now, the slight caveat there might be if you have a really high training load, you're going to be doing a lot of training sessions and high intensity training kind of back to back, because there actually your recovery and how quickly you can get the nutrients in probably is helpful. But for the average session, I normally advise triathletes still try to get nutrition in within 45 minutes and still protein, but it might not be as important as we once thought. But carbohydrates can be super important, but again, just depending on context a little bit. So it depends on how long you're training for and at what intensity. If your training volume isn't particularly high and it wasn't really a high intensity session, then you could get away with not eating much in that post-workout period, although I still usually suggest at least 30 grams of carbohydrates. But if your training load is really high, you've just done a really hard high intensity session and essentially depleted your carb stores, you're doing back-to-back high intensity sessions, or you're a triathlete who has a really high training volume, 15, 20, 25 hours a week, then you're going to be constantly fighting your carbohydrate stores, and you need to try and keep them up as much as possible. And we know that when you use simple forms of carbohydrates, so we are essentially talking glucose, maltodextrin in the post-workout period, we're talking the hour or two afterwards, you can speed up how quickly you replenish your glycogen stores by doing this. So the advice is 1 to 1.2 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight in the post-exercise period. That's been shown in the research to improve your glycogen resynthesis rates. But the takeaway is that it's probably more important after hard, high-intensity sessions and when your training volume is high, and less when it's not. Aim for at least 25 grams of protein and 30 grams of carbs after training, more if you need to. I recently saw on YouTube someone suggest a novel marathon nutrition strategy, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about it. He says that you should avoid taking in any calories 2 hours before the race, and then only take your first gel 20 minutes after the race has begun, and then regular intervals after that. He says that you want your blood sugar levels to be low at the start to maximize the use of fat as energy and conserve glycogen reserves for later race. So what do you think? Is this a sound plan? Now, I really like this question because there's a lot to dig into in it. Now, I usually suggest that you should be having food before a race at least 2 hours before, and usually more like 3 to 4 hours if that's possible. So I kind of agree there. Then depending on the event, I will usually recommend a gel 15 to 30 minutes beforehand. And the aim with this is to top up your glycogen stores, so your body's store of carbohydrates, and then increase your carbohydrate metabolism. So this might actually partly answer the question, because I wouldn't really agree with the rest of what they said. Your blood sugar levels won't be low at that point, they'll just be normal. But also we know that performance, especially in events like marathons, are driven or is driven by carbohydrate. So you're working hard enough for carbohydrates to be a main source of your energy. And when you take a gel, you are upregulating your body's carbohydrate metabolism, meaning you burn more of it more effectively, which is then just going to improve performance. So really the key here is fueling well enough, because that would actually negate, so your ability to use carbohydrates effectively would negate any potential fat burning improvements that you might make from abstaining from carbohydrates before or at the very start of the race. What's the deal with fasted training? My coach suggests doing some morning sessions without breakfast to improve fat adaptation, but I'm worried about bonking during longer rides. Oh gosh, I see this so much on this channel, on YouTube generally, social media. It's such a problem. So my advice is that fasted training should be done at a maximum twice per week, and it should be truly easy. So we're talking 65% of your max heart rate, and it shouldn't be anything more than that, and it should never be longer than an hour. Now, people love the idea of fasted training, and in theory it's wonderful, but it's just not proven to be more effective than adequately fueling with carbohydrates. Because the best way to improve fat adaptation is to train consistently over time and train more. So more hours running, swimming, cycling. That is proven to be the best way at improving your fat metabolism. And carbohydrates support this. And for what it's worth, you can still burn a significant amount of fat for energy while still consuming carbohydrates if you're exercising at the correct intensity and you're, say, taking 30 grams of carbohydrates an hour rather than 90 grams of carbohydrates an hour. Now, most people get their fat burning zone completely wrong. They work way too hard than they should be, or way harder than they should be. And this not only means that they are missing the point of it, so they're not actually in that fat burning zone, meaning they're going to be putting more stress on their body because the body is saying, I really want to use carbohydrates here, but they're also going to be fatiguing themselves more for the times when carbohydrates really matter as well, like their high intensity sessions when they're actually trying to go hard, because they will have put more stress on when it was just meant to be easy. Quick one, bananas versus dates during long rides. Which is better? What do you prefer? I mean, the answer, to be honest, is neither. Both give you great energy. The dates would be easier to carry than bananas on a long training ride. I'd also just consider intensity. So if it was high intensity, then I probably wouldn't go for either a banana or for dates, and instead I would go for something like a sports drink or gels. The reason is those, like banana and dates especially, are going to just take that little bit longer to release energy, which then probably doesn't work that well with doing high intensity, because you want that energy to be, you want your body to work, it to be as easy as possible to release that energy for your body. So I would consider that. I would also just think about what is realistic for you to eat while riding. And this is a really big one in both the winter and also when you're riding with others. So I've worked with triathletes who have had really good intentions about their fueling. They want to use something like a banana, for example, or something different. Something they just kind of enjoy, might be a bit different to usual. But when you actually get to the reality, it's just not possible. So they don't feel that they can open it while riding, but they're with a group or others who are going faster and they're not able to stop, meaning they're not going to be able to get their nutrition in when they need it. Or if you're wearing more layers and you're wearing gloves, can you actually get your nutrition out? Can you open it whilst wearing gloves? A lot of people don't think about this, and then they go to do it and they go, shit, I can't actually open that. So the kind of knock-on effect there is that they actually just underfuel their sessions. So think about it in advance, and that kind of helps dictate what you should do. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about carnivore diet craze seems to be growing. I keep seeing YouTube videos about athletes thriving exclusively on meat. This seems completely bonkers to me. So this is one of those ones where I like to give the analogy of my grandparents smoked their whole life and they lived until 90. So it can't be bad. Just because some people do well on it as a diet, it doesn't mean it's healthy or recommendable. But firstly, I guess to dispel any myths, it's not healthy. You miss out on a lot of micronutrient value. You miss out on fiber, which has numerous benefits. We know that reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease, of certain cancers, and it helps maintain or control blood glucose levels, among so many other benefits that people who are essentially cutting out fiber are really doing themselves a disservice. But also it's poor for endurance sports. So no carbohydrates is generally, and for most triathletes, a real problem. So carbohydrates fuel high intensity training, they even fuel moderate intensity training, and it means that your performance is going to be so much harder. Now, okay, some people, and we know this from the research, there are outliers who will improve on ketogenic diets. I don't think there's specifically any research on carnivore diets in endurance sports because it's total madness and no one would do that or do a study on it. But in terms of ketogenic diets, there are some people who improve, but that is not the majority of people. Now, some people will get better in terms of kind of how they feel subjectively when they're following something like a carnivore diet. And that's fine, but there might be lots of different reasons behind that. So they might have actually just cut out a load of stuff from their diet that wasn't agreeing with them and they just didn't ever realize. They might be cutting out heavily processed foods, refined nutrition, that they were just having loads of. And then when they cut that out, then it's not necessarily a surprise that they actually feel a bit better. But also, I think a lot of people who do it, they want to feel better and they want to almost belong to something and a bit of a movement. And I think this is actually, it's a very powerful thing. We know placebo is important. And so maybe placebo actually helps them to feel better, but also people do this because they want something to belong to. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people who say they feel better on a carnivore diet don't really. If you look behind the scenes at things like their bowel habits, how they feel on a day-to-day basis, I wouldn't be surprised if we're seeing a lot of people who are putting on the kind of Instagram, YouTube, fake life reality, and behind the scenes it's crap. My short answer there is that I wouldn't recommend it. Racing in hot conditions next month, beyond hydration, should I adjust my nutrition strategy for the heat? Yes, you should. The likelihood is that you should prioritize carbohydrate. No, you should prioritize sodium and fluid intake over carbohydrate intake, because it's likely that those things are actually more important. So the way to think about this is that if you're dehydrated, and so for example you're racing in hot conditions, you're more likely to be dehydrated, then it doesn't matter how many carbohydrates you shove in. You're not going to be able to use them properly because you're going to be dehydrated, and when you're dehydrated you send less blood to your abdominal organs, which means your ability to digest and process and absorb carbohydrates is going to be lower, and that means you run the risk of having unabsorbed nutrition in your gut, which will give you GI symptoms, which can make you slow down. You also just won't be getting that carbohydrate in anyway, and we know that independently of carbohydrate nutrient intake, dehydration negatively impacts performance. So, but if you optimize hydration, you can still get carbohydrates in. So you just have to kind of rewire how you're thinking about that. Now, I actually have a whole module in my Tri-Fuel Academy on this, where I go over nutrition challenges in extreme environments. So in the cold, in the hot, and heat acclimation as well. So if you're interested in that, subtle little plug, go and check out. It's part of the Hub, my nutrition membership for triathletes. See if it's right for you. If it is, I would love to have you along. As well as the Tri-Fuel Academy, there's also race nutrition support included as part of the Hub. So I'm able to support triathletes over their races. So if it's particularly hot conditions or some other thing that you're worried about, I will help you to create a personalized race nutrition plan so you can go into it with full confidence, knowing it is all sorted. Are those expensive amino acid supplements worth it for recovery, or am I better off just focusing on whole food protein sources? It's not really worth it. Just focus on hitting your total daily protein intake, which for most triathletes should be between 1.4 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. Now, that doesn't mean that something like a protein powder isn't helpful or worth it. It's just the ones that, or generally the supplements with things like BCAAs, so branched chain amino acids, they just don't really matter if you're hitting your total daily protein intake. So focus on that instead. Getting mixed messages about caffeine timing for race day. Is it better to abstain for a few days before and get a bigger boost on race day, or maintain my current habits? I love this. It's a really good one. There's just, people worry about it a lot, and probably because triathletes drink heaps of coffee. Now, there is no good evidence really for abstaining, and if anything, it's likely to make it worse. So if you've ever drank, or I suspect you might, drink coffee or consume caffeine regularly, then you'll know that if you decrease that intake, especially quickly, you are going to feel shit. So if you imagine doing that whilst you're preparing for your race, mentally, you might be traveling, going abroad, that is going to suck. And actually that is going to be worse race day preparation for you than anything else. So I would just say to triathletes, have normal consumption going into race day, and just carry on. So you are still going to get the actual ergogenic benefits, so the performance benefits of caffeine during your race, if you don't abstain. Now, if you're drinking 4 or 5 cups of coffee, caffeinated coffee a day, I would probably be telling you to decrease it anyway. But if you're in the couple of cups range, up to maybe 3 cups, fine, just carry on. I'm transitioning to a plant-based diet, but struggling to meet my caloric needs during peak training weeks. So what I'd say here is just, I would optimize your nutrition outside of training. So by what I mean there is have the easy to digest stuff before training. So that might be sport specific products like gels, drinks, obviously making sure they're vegan, but I'm pretty sure most are. Using white bread, maple syrup, low fat vegan rice puddings, anything really that's kind of like light that you would normally do before training and that works for you. You might have something that already works, that's fine, keep with that. Then just make liberal use of things like healthy fats, so things like nuts, nut butters, seeds, olive oil, avocado, outside of training, so where it's not going to impact your performance in any significant way. Now, we know that vegan diets make it harder to hit your calorie needs. That's an issue, but it is possible. I interviewed a pro triathlete who I actually still work with, Lizzie Rayner, is on this YouTube channel. I'll pop a picture up of it. Check that video out if you're interested. We go over this in way more detail. It's like a proper discussion on it and how Lizzie fuels her training as a pro triathlete who is doing incredibly well. Been hearing about training low, competing high with carbohydrates. My friend swears by it, but I'm skeptical. Wouldn't training in a glycogen depleted state just lead to poor quality sessions? So this is really good. And first I'd say it's worth clarifying what you actually mean here. So do you just mean having low carbohydrates all the time, or do you mean a specific strategy like train high, sleep low? So low carbs all the time, no. Kind of mentioned it earlier. It's not worth it. And yes, it will likely make your training sessions harder or kind of ruin your overall progress and progression. I wouldn't stick away from it. But train high, sleep low as a specific nutrition protocol, maybe. So this is where you strategically manipulate your diet and your carbohydrate intake. So the train high part is where you fuel before something like a high intensity session with a good amount of carbohydrates like you normally would do. And so you get that high quality training session, and that depletes your muscle glycogen stores. So and you don't replace them afterwards. So that's the sleep low part. And then you train in the morning in a fasted state without having anything. So your muscle glycogen stores are depleted, and then you do some easy low intensity training. The aim is that that increases or is more effective at improving your fat metabolism. Now, there is some evidence for it, but it's quite mixed. I would only say do it for small blocks. So we're talking like 3-week blocks at a time, then go back to your regular training and nutrition habits. I would make sure to do it out of race season as well, so that it doesn't negatively impact anyway. But to be honest, for most people, I just actually wouldn't recommend it. There's not enough good evidence for it. There's significant risks to it as well. And most triathletes are just better off focusing on doing the basics right. So having enough carbs to support your training and just not getting silly with it. That's likely to have way more of a positive impact on your training if you just do that consistently over time than looking for these very nuanced improvements, which just as I say, they carry lots of risk, and the potential benefits just they don't outweigh the risks. So focus on doing the basics right, and that's the best thing you can do. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that. If you've got questions, as I say, put them into the comment section. I'll be really happy to answer them. Go and check out my newsletter at nutritiontriathlon.com if you would like. And if you want to watch some more videos on nutrition topics like what we've talked about today, then you can watch one of these two here.